Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. Drama at Ferrari after a disastrous Silverstone Grand Prix with Charles Leclerc way down the order and even Lewis Hamilton unable to put a very tricky Ferrari on the podium. Reports say from Charles Leclerc and Fred Vasseur themselves there is a major issue with this Ferrari SF25 that they don't want to talk about. What is this problem? How is it holding them back in certain circumstances? And are the Italian press right that they now need to listen to Lewis Hamilton in building their 2026 machine? Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate. Lots happened this weekend. Thanks for all the recent support on the channel, and let's get right into things. Nico Hülkenberg, what a result yesterday, and this I thought was pretty remarkable too. There's actually a couple of disqualifications you guys can see here as well, but this is Hülkenberg's career 239th Grand Prix, and of all of these placements, his most popular is actually P8, a very load of P6s, P7s, P5s, couple of P4s, and then DSQs, DNFs in due course, but finally a podium yesterday with Sauber. And honestly, looking at his recent drives, P17 to P7 in Australia, P15 to P5 in Spain, P20 to P9 last time out in Austria, and then in Silverstone goes one better in sixes on the podium. Remarkable stuff to such an extent that Hülkenberg has outscored the whole of Red Bull in the last 4 rounds since they changed the flexi front wings. Kind of remarkable, of course, all those points have come from Max Verstappen, and yeah, he was taken out of the race back in Austria. Some of you might not argue it's a totally fair comparison, but the point still stands that Hülkenberg has done a remarkable job, as to be fair have Sauber. Plenty of other talking points though yesterday. This was Franco Colapinto coming into the pits. This was on the formation lap, so they decided to chuck him on the set of hard tyres as well. Now, to be honest, had he gone out here and made it out of the pit box, what's the likelihood that car gets crashed and there's a load of damage? Probably pretty high, to be honest. But obviously you can never predict. But he tries to get out of the pit. I don't know. Again, I want to give Colapinto the benefit of the doubt and say that he just had a gearbox malfunction. There was a bit of talk about this. You guys remember when he stopped at the end of the pit lane back in Spain? And there were some reports that it was his fault, and there were other, like, that he basically mishandled the car, and there were other reports that it was the car's fault. Feels like kind of a similar thing here, so I don't know personally what the truth is. As I say, I want to give him the benefit of that up, but he tries to come out of the pits and the car just doesn't work, and then he has to retire the car. So it was an all-time stinker from them. And there were rumours, I mean, even the broadcast was talking about it. I'm not going to lie, we've not seen in the press and stuff massive reports that Colapinto's going to get replaced imminently. But even on the broadcast, they were suggesting that the British Grand Prix could be Colapinto's last race, and they might bring Doohan back. I mean, look, I think Doohan was pretty hard done by. He wasn't great, but Colapinto's certainly been no better. Or they're going to sign Bottas, and Toto would be happy to allow Bottas to go to another team. I think for Bottas's perspective, it's probably, as chaotic as it is, a more attractive option than taking the Cadillac seat next year, certainly because it's going to be Mercedes power next season. Cadillac's going to be Ferrari power, which also Bottas is familiar with his time at Alfa Romeo, Sauber, but Mercedes powered Alpine next year could be a solid machine. I mean, who knows? But with Briatore in charge, anything's possible, and it could be complete chaos. So just Briatore's there. Don't rule out Bottas magically arriving in that seat in a couple of weekends' time, because Toto says that the talks around Bottas's future are intensifying. Whether that means next year, whether that could somehow mean middle of this season, that would be a big deal. Speaking of Toto and his drivers, Max says life goes on at Red Bull or somewhere else, and he says, I would prefer not to talk about that. So if you guys didn't see this quote yesterday, just thought I'd mention it real quick because it was certainly a talking point. Max has a little grin on his face. But I will say, if Mercedes are the target, it's not like they had a good day yesterday. It was an absolute disaster. Everything that could go wrong for Mercedes yesterday went wrong. Terrible strategic decisions, no pace at all, crashes, like Antonelli getting rear-ended. It was all over the place, Russell spinning out. Complete shambles. I think Stroll, to his credit, we've got to give the guy some credit, right? Like, Stroll is a confusing driver to many. Look, Stroll is no Latifi, and I will keep hammering this point home. Of course, Stroll, in his last 24 qualifying sessions, has been out-qualified by Alonso 24 times in a row. So I'm not saying that Stroll is good, but everyone knows that on a wet day in chaotic conditions, Stroll does have a performance in him, and he's done it plenty of times before. I don't know what it is about these type of conditions that bring the best out of Stroll, but they do. And a driver without any skill at all would not be able to put together some of the performances he has in the rain over the years. And yesterday, yeah, he was up in P3. He would have felt like, given the strategy and everything played out, he should have done better from there. But the car seemed very much so a handful. Towards the end of the race, there was just no pace on those soft tyres, and Stroll says crazy is an understatement. It was the worst piece of, you guys know the rest, I've ever driven in my life, to be honest, but it's okay, we got a P7, so I don't know, fair play to Stroll, like, good performance, especially just keeping it on the track was a good performance yesterday, because that was not easy to do. Now, before we get to the Ferrari drama, I did just want to comment on this, because it was a big talking point yesterday, and everyone has their opinion on Oscar Piastri, and I think that's good, because going into this race, there were probably some people out there that were kind of impartial on Oscar, because just that's the way that he approaches things. He's very calm, generally, in his demeanour. But I think after what happens, even to some degree in Austria, he was pretty frustrated with getting held up, right, by some of the drama at the end of that race. And also, especially after the penalty in Silverstone, I think we've seen a bit of a new side of Piastri. As I said in my video yesterday, I like that he was really annoyed about this. Like, he was absolutely furious about the penalty and the implications. He didn't want to talk about it because he thought he was going to get fined if he did. That, to me, is a champion mentality. Like, I don't want to see good losers. Like, I don't know, in my opinion, you should be a bad loser if you're trying to be the best in the world. And I think Piastri struck me yesterday as a bit of a bad loser. And some will say it depends on your perspective, right? Like, either that's a good thing or it's a bad thing. Like, Piastri was still, you know, he wasn't terrible. Like, he wasn't going off on everyone and like making a scene. But he definitely struck me as someone who really hates losing, which is, I think, a good thing. But the way that that came out, some would argue maybe, I saw a lot of people saying they lost respect for Piastri, especially because of this comment, which, look, it's an interesting comment. I think what I will say about this from Piastri is that if Lando said this, God, could you imagine the reaction online? So Oscar said, as you guys probably remember from yesterday's race, I don't think the penalty was very fair. It's a big question, and if you don't think it's fair either, I think that we should swap back and race. Now, of course, even after the race, Piastri admitted it wouldn't have been fair on Lando to do that. McLaren were never going to do it. Lando, even if he was asked to, let's be honest, was never going to give back the place. It's his home Grand Prix. Like, it's never, you know, this is a pretty outrageous statement from Oscar, but I get it, right? In the moment, heat of the moment, in the cockpit, I think we have seen Piastri, I wouldn't say get a little flustered, but I think I like what happened yesterday because I think it shows us a new side of Oscar on some level. Like, he's really embroiled in this championship fight. Every point is going to matter, and we're seeing a new kind of side of him come out a little bit. And I think that makes him a more compelling challenger to watch. Because if things get spicy, you know, you can expect Piastri to be involved in that, which I think is exciting for us watching from home. And yeah, as I say, if Lando said this, like, could you imagine the criticism he would be getting online? And it's not like Piastri hasn't also been getting kind of crucified for this as well. But I think what's good about yesterday is, whatever you think about Piastri and whether you agree with my opinions on him or not, people have more opinions about him today than they did yesterday. And I think that's good for the championship because it makes him a more interesting character. There was also a bit of drama. This is another piece of the puzzle, really. So this was the podium yesterday. And if you guys watch this, many people noted it in real time that when everything was over, you know, Piastri came up in the interviews and said, you know, well done to Nico, but that's all I'm going to say, because he was annoyed at his own thing. And look, if I'm a driver competing for a championship, okay, congrats, Nico, you've come third, well done. But look, what I will say is, imagine that this was Lewis and Max on the podium. Like, you know, you could imagine the reaction that Hülkenberg would have got, how much it had been sprayed and everything. You know, like, the podium wasn't quite as spectacular as it could have been. The McLaren boys did spray, like, Nico a little bit, but it was his first podium in 240 races. You know, there was a little bit, right? So Piastri, like, that's Lando, he sprayed him a little bit, and I don't think Hülkenberg would have been too mad about it, right? But there was just talk about this, wasn't there? Because people were saying, well, you know, maybe Lando and Oscar could have handled this differently. At the end of the day, I don't think it's a massive deal, but this tweet got 70-odd thousand likes here, saying Nico got his first podium, McLaren, they're both such losers, he didn't make him feel welcomed seriously, etc. Vibes were off. So, I don't know, just something to contemplate as we get into the second half of the season. But let's talk about Ferrari. This weekend, so much happened, and this is one of the pieces. Benedetto Vigna, so that is this man right here on the right-hand side, one of the top dogs over there at Ferrari. Now, he was there this weekend, and he was talking to some people and trying to get a glimpse of what's happening, because Fred Vasseur does not have a contract going into next season. We don't currently know whether Vasseur will stay as the team boss. So Vigna was there. There was a rumour that John Alcan was going to make a statement about it. He's one of the other top guys over there, the chairman at Ferrari. But Vigna told Auto Racer, I saw a united team. I am pleased. With Fred, we are discussing. We had lunch together. So that says quite a lot. I don't know what the Ferrari top brass's opinion of Vasseur is. What I think we can say with some certainty is that the majority of personnel internally at Ferrari want Vasseur to stay. Whether you really rate Vasseur or not, getting rid of him now would almost certainly be a terrible idea going into 2026. The turmoil that would bring is surely a bad decision. And what I think Vigna kind of means by a united team is that, well, they're pretty united in their support for Vasseur. If Vigna asks Hamilton, if he asks Leclerc, if he asks more than likely Leclerc and some of the other top guys in the technical team, they're probably going to tell you that keeping Fred is the right decision, even if, that's an honest conversation with Vigna, making it very clear that, he wants the true perspective. That's what I imagine, and therefore it has now become more likely that that will remain the case, and Vasseur will get an extension. Vasseur was asked to comment on this and said, I've got nothing to add to that discussion, so yes, we shall see in due course, but I would imagine the chances of Vasseur keeping his job, which is probably a good thing for Ferrari, at least for the short to medium term, is now more likely than it was before the Silverstone weekend, despite the fact that it was, in pretty much all ways, a very disastrous weekend for Ferrari. They did gain points on Mercedes, can you believe it, in the championship, but as Vasseur says, we're not here to be fourth or to finish second in the championship, extending the gap to Merc. We are here because we want to win. The reality is McLaren are miles down the road and untouchable in basically all conditions, and even if Ferrari nailed it over the winter, there's probably nothing they could have done given the upgrades that McLaren brought and the success that it has brought them. Now, this is funny. Vasseur says Hamilton's GPS was down for like half of the race. We didn't know where Lewis was. It was difficult to manage. And it's pretty funny in hindsight to think about this. The obvious joke is to say, well, damn right, it's good they didn't know where he was, because if they did, then they would have called some sort of strategy to screw up his Grand Prix. This was a couple of overtakes that Hamilton made. It's actually really cool to see from the trackside here. The overtakes that Hamilton made on, it was Ocon, wasn't it, and George Russell down into Village and then into the loop. So yeah, just was cool to see from the side camera, really. Hamilton had a difficult race, certainly for his home Grand Prix. Podium there 11 times in a row. This was going to be the 12th in a row, and he was still very close to executing it in clearly a Ferrari that was really a nightmare. Like, Leclerc had... He described it, Leclerc, as the worst race of his career. Now, that might be an overstatement. Of course, it's very much in the moment, but it's definitely right up there. Like, Leclerc's Grand Prix yesterday was up there with the worst race that he's ever done. And Hamilton, as he says, like, I would just love to have a consistent balance in the car, a car that actually turns at the low-speed corners, a more stable car. I think we're looking great through the weekend. I think in practice, we're always right up there. We're not able to fully extract everything in quali. This could be a clue to what we're about to discuss with this fundamental issue to the Ferrari, which they're apparently not able to solve right now. The race is harder. That's where I want to get the most out of it. And then Hamilton makes it pretty clear that what he would like to do is sit down with those designing next year's car and have the conversation. It'll be nice to sit down with the people that design the car for next year, because there's elements of this car that no one else can look to. So, this got a fair bit of traction as well. Now, I'm sure this conversation is likely been ongoing and maybe will continue to be so, but with the problem with the SO25 we're going to discuss in a second, it raises very interesting questions as to whether Ferrari need to fundamentally change their approach. So this was a big article that came out today. It's an opinion piece in the Gazzetta, but it's nonetheless a big deal that this is hitting the front pages pretty much of the Italian press from the Formula One side. And they say, Ferrari, or this individual says, Ferrari, it's time to listen to Lewis. And this is what the article article talks about here, effectively the implication is, and understandably at that the way that the team has approached things over the last few years, and maybe Leclerc's approach in general, just isn't optimal enough. Leclerc talked about it quite strongly yesterday, that he prefers a very extreme setup. That's the way that he's tried to take this car, and on days like yesterday, it backfires massively. And there is an argument that says Hamilton's won 7 Drivers' Championships since 2008, while Ferrari has brought home 0 in the meantime. It means accepting and marrying his vision of the job and the car. Those who want everything right away and don't know how F1 works consider their difficulties with a single-seater that is too inconsistent in its behaviour as a consequence of a decline of the champion of the past. But what the Englishman has been preaching for a while, since he framed the situation in Maranello, is a change of philosophy, a less extreme future project with a good load base capable of making life easier for the drivers who are not bad. This would be a real necessity for Leclerc too, who through frustration and suffering has come to mortify himself. You know, after qualifying, Leclerc was so harsh on himself. He said that he was terrible. He said that Vasseur should be super angry with his performance, basically, and Leclerc after Sunday said that he's just terrible, it's disgusting, his performance. And look, we know that Leclerc is very harsh on himself, and sometimes that's to his credit, and sometimes I think it goes too far. But the reality is that whatever Ferrari have been cooking over the last few years has led here, and this is not where they want to be. So that's the question, isn't it? You know, there was a move bordering on desperation yesterday. We know the couple of overtakes that he tried to make into the loop, you know, just kind of sending it up the inside of the Williams. You know, yeah, maybe he made it work, he made it stick, but pretty desperate overtaking attempt in many respects. Always racing beyond the limit when the stability of the rear end comes and goes. Even clear talents like his are prone to errors and indecision. The Monegasque may also be at the most severe judge of himself and does him credit, but self-esteem in sport remains fundamental. Charles must be calmed down and recharged. There's a few other things in the article too, but the bottom line is, and this is what Leclerc said after the race, that was so bad, I'm at a loss for words, not sure whether it's where I put the car in terms of setup or that was so difficult. And Leclerc said a few things afterwards and says effectively that he doesn't think the setup can be responsible for all of the struggles that the Ferrari had yesterday. He did admit that he prefers a more extreme setup that maybe backfired on him substantially. Of course, Hamilton was at least a second a lap faster at good points during the Grand Prix. Leclerc says Hamilton was at least some positive of the day. I need to observe to understand where I went wrong, but there could be a more fundamental issue here in play. Hamilton says the tyres were dropping off, the car doesn't like the low speed, loads of understeer, locking up the left front, just a nightmare to drive. Now, the question is there a fundamental issue with the car that is unable to be solved? Now, you guys might remember, I want to say it was maybe even Australia or around the first few Grand Prix of the season, Hamilton made a comment of I think it was an issue with his floor, actually. I think that's what he said that it was. But yeah, that's right. It was around China, wasn't it? Maybe in the Grand Prix just shortly after that Hamilton said that his floor, they'd noticed it was slightly different to Leclerc's in some way and it was costing him some performance, and they solved that. Did it make him any faster? Maybe. I don't know. The point is that Leclerc, after qualifying, said this: no, there are no solutions coming in the upgrades. There is something more in the car that I've never talked about, and believe me, it's better that I don't. Let's hope the solution comes soon. He went on to say, is it a problem that can be solved? He says, I don't think so. And Leclerc said a couple of other things on it too, that it's a very weird problem that seemingly rears its head a lot in Q3. So maybe it's not an issue that's affecting them so much in the race, but in Q3, when push comes to shove, they just didn't improve much. It was a little confusing because Max improved by 4/10, George improved by like 6/10, the McLaren drivers improved by at least a couple of tenths, Q2 to Q3 in Silverstone. Hamilton and Leclerc were basically on the same time, Q2 to Q3, which you wouldn't necessarily expect. Now, Leclerc also said, I don't want to go into details, but there is something very weird that we have got to fight with the car. So what is this? What is going on right now? Vasseur was asked to comment and he said that Leclerc said that he won't disclose it, so I won't disclose it. It can be fixed, but it's true that we are struggling with something. So there's something that Ferrari have found or discovered, and maybe they've known about it for some time, and it's potentially a specific qualifying issue that they're struggling with and trying to resolve. Whether they can fix it could well be the difference between whether they can actually score a win this year or not, and maybe it's critical for next year as well. But the idea that Ferrari have a car which is already problematic and then they've discovered some sort of major weakness and issue within the car, it's not really a good sign for the entire project. Is it true that they simply took too much risk by changing the concept 99% this year? Quite possibly, yes, but there is a rumour about this. Now, I will say this is again from Formula Passion, one of my favourite Italian outlets, and they do talk a lot about it could be this, it possibly is that. So when the Italian press is saying that, it's an even bigger pinch of salt than normal. But I will say that it could be a fuel delivery system issue. That is the rumour, that when the car has only just got enough fuel for the one flying lap and the important run in the final part of qualifying, then in high-speed corners with sudden directional changes, the fuel may be moving away from the pumps, potentially causing a loss of power. Do we believe it? Is that actually what's going on? Possibly. I don't know. It's a theory at the end of the day as to what Ferrari's issue might be. What do you guys think in the comments section below? I'd be very intrigued. So that's where we're going to leave it for today. Lots of drama has happened as always. And we're also going to leave it with this. So these are the team standings right now. Ferrari are a million miles behind McLaren, but they are still in second place somehow. Mercedes in 210. Red Bull down at 172. Williams are actually, I'm not going to lie, I remember at the start of the season, people were saying how Williams were competing with Ferrari. I mean, that changed very quickly. And it always was going to. Like, anyone who seriously thought that Williams posed a threat to Ferrari this season was delusional, respectfully. But the funny thing is, after Williams' difficult few rounds, Sauber are now potentially giving them a bit of a challenge. I don't know what's going to happen here between these places, because Alpine scored good points with Gasly, but they're still in 10th by, quite some margin. So, yeah, it's actually a really interesting championship table this year. And this is also pretty interesting too. So Piastri at 234, Norris at 226. Verstappen has gained himself a bit of a cushion on George, which has maybe something to do with this whole, if he's fourth in the championship at the summer break, contract exit clause. That is becoming less likely to be activated, possibly. Hulkenberg moves up into 9th, but the gap at the top goes down to just 8 points with 12 races and like 4 sprints still to go. So very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.